SEC Championship, Will. It is indeed happening on Saturday. Number 9, that's right, number 9, Alabama against number 3, Georgia. Georgia's a 2.5-point favorite. The over-under I have is 13, count them, 13 third down conversions for Alabama. That's what they had the first time that these two teams played back in September. As we'll get to with Aaron, so many of those points were scored early on because of those third down conversions, and it just kind of made it easy to forget that Alabama was scoreless in the second half of this one. Still had some deep possessions and still converted some key third downs, but that was a huge issue for Georgia early on in the season. Lack of a pass rush, very well documented. We've talked about it a ton. They're much improved on third down. Really, over the course of the last month, they were 28% with their opposing third down conversion rate in November, thanks in large part to an improved pass rush. Can't have a lack of a pass rush against Ty Simpson. We just know that to be true. You watch teams like Auburn and Oklahoma, the way that they tried to send pressure at him, and it makes you wonder if there is a very clear and obvious game plan for Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann in this one. But by the way, Ty Simpson has 11 turnover-worthy plays this year when blitzed and 3 when he's not blitzed. Seems kind of obvious there, but he can still pick you apart while taking a hit. We saw that in the Auburn game. We have seen teams that have tried to blitz him a lot and then have not gotten home as well because Alabama can mass protect. I thought Auburn blitzed more than anybody all year against Ty Simpson. And I went back and looked at the numbers. That was not the case. They blitzed a lot, but 53%, well below the 66.7% blitz rate that Oklahoma had.
I was going to say LSU and Oklahoma were sending it after time. Every play was like, okay, this guy's coming.
Yeah. Georgia blitzed only 51% of the time in that first matchup. Didn't get home once. Only 6 pressures on 21 dropbacks with blitzes. So that's why you can't just say, hey, send pressure. It's not automatically getting home every single time. He can obviously get rid of the ball quickly. Alabama is not a total liability on the offensive line in the way that some others are. So that's a little bit more complicated than simply send everything in the kitchen sink. You have to be able to get pressure. At least Oklahoma had 8 pressures and 4 sacks off of those blitzes, and it was pivotal in that game. It does feel like that's going to define this game. It really does. Because if Alabama doesn't have Jam Miller, who we're doing this again before injury reports come out on Wednesday night, he left the Iron Bowl on crutches in a boot. That would be another reason why it could be tough sledding for a ground game like this that has struggled this year against a run defense that Georgia has that's 6th in the country against the run. Story of Jam Miller's season, Will. Story of his year. Play his best game of the year, play his best half of the year, and then leave his best game of the year. Happened against Mizzou. It happened against Auburn. Daniel Hill didn't even play when Alabama and Georgia met back in September. Would expect to see plenty of him with or without Jam Miller. What should we expect to see from Georgia's run game as it works through a key injury with Drew Bobo? Don't know. Don't know that he's going to be
Bobo's just holding up the Georgia offense like Atlas.
They are. Very much, man. We'll get to it with Aaron, but that feels all of a sudden like a huge storyline moving forward. Wouldn't surprise me if Kirby's trying to play the long game with that all-important center position, especially after seeing how much Georgia struggled to run the football in the second half against Georgia Tech. The question is, does that change Georgia's approach? And is this less of a balanced offense? Because it's been a pretty balanced offense most of the year. It's not that you need perfect balance to beat Bama, but you do need to avoid what is, I think, an improved Bama pass rush, being able to pin its ears back against Gunnar Stockton. Bama in that first matchup was much more content to sit back in coverage. They're like, hey, let's see if Gunnar Stockton can kind of pick us apart. They only had 5 pressure dropbacks all game against Stockton. Georgia Tech did not blitz a whole lot either in that matchup last week. How much does Kane Womack try and lean into that? Or is that not something that'll translate if he's assuming that Bobo is just going to be really conservative? I don't know. But there's a great chess match that's going to go on between these two teams. Why does it always feel like when these two teams play, it's just a tale of two halves? It's just 2 different football games that these teams play. And maybe it is because these teams are really good at making adjustments. And I'm not going to pretend to know every little adjustment that these teams are making. I'll leave that for the X's and O's, Brooks Austins of the world, who can actually sit there and break that down in real time, the Cole Kubelicks. But I feel like these 2 teams are really good at making adjustments this year. They have been. And Will, I've buried the lead a little bit here by not mentioning the obvious. Hey, Connor, can we talk about Kirby's 1-7 record against Bama? Can we talk about it? Sure, Connor, we can. I'll also talk about how in the second half against Kalen DeBoer, Kirby has quietly outscored Bama 34-11. 2 key lapses on one on each side of the ball that very much changed how we're talking about this rivalry currently. And that's not my way of spin zoning this for Georgia. But Bama has jumped out to double-digit leads in both of these DeBoer Smart matchups that we've seen. I don't necessarily think that Kirby has been thoroughly outcoached by DeBoer, even if it does look like maybe DeBoer also has Kirby's number. I don't know that that's a fair takeaway. Do you agree with that?
I mean, I'd say it comes down to, you're right, tale of two halves. This is simplifying, but it really does come down to 2 plays, right? It's the Ryan Williams play last year. It's the Cass Jones play this year.
I think it's even the dropped touchdown that Georgia would have had to take the lead against Bama in the game this year is what I was thinking.
Yeah,
and then I was thinking the Ryan Williams play last year too.
Yeah. But the point being, it's a couple of decisions. It felt like some of the Saban stuff was a lot more inevitable, at least than the DeBoer stuff. But as we've talked about DeBoer, that's kind of his whole thing. Again, why did he go for it on 4th down in the Iron Bowl? Because he's that guy. Because he always gets it. Because it is inevitable. So maybe it feels a little bit less. But I think that, you hit on some of this stuff. I think what's so fascinating here is, for these 2 defenses, right? Like Kane Womack, I'm going to give this dude his flowers, man. I think he's night and day different than he was last year. I still don't feel like I was exactly wrong. Like at any point in last year, you can kind of look at some of their numbers and be like, oh, well, they turned it around. But what he showed to me last year was a guy that was impatient as a defensive coordinator. He was a guy that sat in the same coverage too often. He was a guy that sent blitzes too often. He was a guy that was not malleable with the game. It was like he was trying to out-talent people on defense, which is pretty hard to do in the SEC. There are a lot of good offenses. This year, if you go through and look at what, their pressure rate, Alabama is number 1 in passing defense in the entire conference. That is fundamentally a different person than Kane Womack was last year, because last year was more about the chaos. It was more about the big splashy plays. This year, it's on a per play basis. You don't want to hang out with the Alabama defense. They're a bad hang. They're going to find a way to shut you down. Yeah, they have talent. Yeah, they have these, monsters up front. Yeah, they're going to hit you. Yeah, they're going to find crazy turnovers like they had in the South Carolina game and the Eastern Illinois
game. Auburn game too.
Yeah, they're going to have weird, stuff is going to go their way because that's Alabama, right? But it is more about, it's not this gambling defense like you've seen at Ole Miss or at LSU, where it's like, well, if you could just survive this pass rush, you could kind of get the ball out. With Alabama, it's almost like we're living on a per play basis, right? And so that being said, on the other side of it, you talk about how to get to Alabama and it's pressure. And that is something that Georgia has been, I think it's safe to say this now, the worst in the conference at. They're last in the conference in sacks. They're last in the conference in tackles for loss. So this is not a Georgia team that has been able to say, we're going to get after you, like some of those teams that we just talked about, right? And so that being said, it's a very interesting game plan for Kirby, who is, one of, if not the, premier defensive mind. Oh my gosh, the truck is stuck in my rock again. We're going to keep rocking. Anyway, so we're going to, oh my God, it's a trash truck this time. At least I'm supposed to be here. Anyway, so that being said, I think we've seen Kirby in these big games, against Texas. We've seen him throw out new things. We've seen him throw out exotic blitzes and different defensive line alignments and exotic packages. Against Alabama, he's done creative things that haven't worked as often, that are they're both different from the typical game plan, but it feels like one is a little bit overthinking and one is a little bit, just right against Texas, i.e. the onside kick. We're always going to play the result on that stuff, right? I mean, if that onside kick gets recovered by Texas and they go down the field and score a field goal, at least it's like, oh, why'd you do that? So that being said, I think that the key for Kirby is to truly trust himself, right? I think that you're going to need to show something in this game that's different from what you've shown all year, because Ty Simpson is happy to sit back and pick you apart. I think that you're going to need to take some chances and you're going to need to trust your guys. Now, that doesn't mean get Cass Jones out on some more swing passes and hope that he falls forward for 8 yards like you did a couple of times.
We'll get to that later with Aaron.
Yeah. And that was one of the Texas game. I was sitting there with Parrott. He's like, here he comes. Here he comes. They had a 4th down. Like I said, they expected him to fall forward for 8 yards. And it was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, that's not trusting yourself. That's having irrational expectations. And so I'm not going to blame it all on Cass Jones. It's on Kirby, right? And so not letting these little bumps in the road dictate, not letting the Alabama machine with all the 3rd down conversions like you talked about get you to be impatient. I talked about that just now with Kane Womack, where he was impatient last year. Kirby doesn't need to be impatient. You need to understand that you are the bully in this conference, even if it hadn't been that way against Alabama. But when you try to do an upset game plan against Alabama, it doesn't work. So I would say, like I said, you gotta really take that big swing. I think you have to say, I trust my guys. If we give up the big play, that's always who we've been. We always get the picks against Georgia Tech, against Texas in these big moments. And we're not just going to let Alabama get us to 3rd and 2 over and over and over again and hope somebody drops a pass, because they just don't on that team.
Can they find that window? Because they've been so good at finding that window and seizing it. And looks like they had seized the window against Bama, and then Bama just turns out, they're able to make those key plays down the stretch and keep Georgia's defense on the field, and ultimately they're not able to pull off a comeback there. But what does this game come down to? Does it come down to the fact that Kirby in the 4 Bama matchups in Atlanta is 0-4, even with arguably the best defense of the 21st century that he had in 2021? Maybe. Does it come down to the fact that Kalen DeBoer is 7-1 against AP top 10 teams during his 4 seasons as a power conference coach? Probably not, considering Kirby is 23-10 in those spots. Can't really just default to that. Or does it just come down to something else? Does it just come down to something that is so simple and almost hiding in plain sight? Bama needs it more. Bama does have the benefit now, after we found out on Tuesday night that Bama is the 9 seed instead of the 10, which is huge. Major development that Bama switched spots with Notre Dame heading into conference championship weekend. It did feel like the selection committee gave the Tide a bit of a buffer so that it wouldn't be punished for potentially losing an extra game that it earned. And I do think that there was the SMU precedent last year that should make Bama feel a little bit more comforted by that. But I tend to think that Bama, in the way that it's going to view this internally, is a must win. I've given up assuming like I know exactly what the selection committee is going to do. And I know these are very educated guesses, but like Booger saying that he still believes the selection committee will do the right thing and put Miami ahead of Notre Dame. I'm like, what? What makes you believe that? I don't have any faith in that. What are you talking about? Like,
that's been my joke all week. It's like, wow, college football is ruled by money and powerful people. They don't always do it to the best interest of the sport. That's crazy. Yeah. Personal biases come through.
And look, that would be the right thing. It just would have been the right thing 4 weeks ago. Doing it now would just be so strange. Like, why do we have these 5 rankings with Notre Dame and Miami being viewed in a different light? So now
that's
Notre
like
Dame,
wrestling. That's like, oh my God, they've dropped Notre Dame.
Yeah. So now it's Notre Dame, not Bama, who has to sweat out a potential BYU win, and maybe even more. I don't know. Bama, though, I think if they're trying to view this as what's at stake for us, they'll tell themselves they need to win this to get into the playoff. Okay. That message will be communicated throughout that locker room. There's no doubt in my mind. And then, oh, by the way, Bama can still clinch, in my opinion, a first round bye if they win this game. I do think that would be the case. We have a whole lot of precedent every year of the college football playoff era. The winner of the SEC championship has earned a top 4 seed. Now, I realize last year it's different. That was guaranteed if they were able to win, if Georgia won the SEC championship. But still, there's a lot of precedent there. And I do think that the selection committee has at least set up that possibility. And I think they would jump Oklahoma. That would frustrate Oklahoma fans. I totally get that. And if Oklahoma is all of a sudden having a road playoff game while Alabama gets a first round bye, even though Oklahoma went into their building and won, that would not sit well. And there would be Oklahoma fans very frustrated by that. I fully acknowledge that. I think winning the SEC is different. I think beating Georgia twice would matter a whole lot. I really do. And I think that Bama having all that at stake is going to matter. This is the 3rd consecutive game for Georgia in which it's playing a game and doesn't have to worry about making the playoff. And I get that losing to Charlotte would have reset that. Okay. But Georgia didn't have to go into that game desperate, and Georgia is still competing for a round 1 bye. Obviously, I just said that's at stake in Atlanta, but it's locked in to at least have a home playoff game, and Bama isn't. I would argue that I think that they're in ideal shape to get either like an ACC champ or that group of 5 champ. I think no matter what, Georgia will have that very favorable first round matchup. I talk about 5 and 6 is so important. Getting to that 5 and 6 mark, there's a big difference between a 6 seed and a 7 seed, and being able to face the likes of Tulane or North Texas or James Madison or Virginia. Like having one of those teams come to Athens instead of Bama or Notre Dame, that's big. It really is. I still think Bama wants it more. I think Bama needs it more. So I'm rolling with the Tide. 28-24, Bama wins.
I'm going to make the same prediction, but I'm going to do it for a different reason, which is that I think just schematically what Bama has shown and what Georgia has shown, Bama is a very specific team. And I think that to beat Bama, we've seen exactly what it looks like. Like we talked about, Auburn and LSU and Oklahoma that is able to frustrate Ty Simpson. I don't think Georgia has exactly that style of defense. I think that, again, what Bama struggles at is running the ball. Well, when you're last in the conference in tackles for loss, it's not like you can really dominate that side of the ball and say, okay, well, we'll make Ty Simpson beat us, because that's been what they've done all year, So I think Bama is a flawed team. Like, don't get me wrong. I think that there are certainly teams that, can stay sound and expose them. But we've seen the blueprint now essentially 3 weeks in a row, because the Auburn game, I feel, probably shouldn't have been as close as it was, even though they won it in the end, right? It was through defense that they were able to do that. And I don't think Georgia's a bad defense. I think they are likely a better defense than at least probably all of those teams other than Oklahoma, right? Which is weird to say. It's just what their strengths and weaknesses are, and schematically they're completely different. And so we talked about chaos, now how critical of a component it is. If you can create that chaos against Alabama, you have a shot. And I think that with Georgia on the other side, I think that these are two quarterbacks that have been probably about, I would say, at equal level throughout the year, right? They're guys that have been similar. They have been, able to spread the ball around. They have not been guys that will really put you in situations to lose. But like that being said, I think in these last several weeks, I think that Gunnar Stockton has kind of, I hate to say, come back down to earth. Let me ask you this question. Do you think that Georgia Tech was able to stifle the Georgia offense, or do you think that was a little bit of them looking ahead to Alabama?
I think
they didn't even know about Alabama at that point.
No. I think I'll defend Bobo there. I'll defend Bobo. It wasn't pretty. It definitely wasn't. But you look at some of the play calls they had where Stockton's got a design rollout, and he can potentially try and target that guy in the flat. He can potentially try and throw something at the next level, 15 yards downfield, or he can just take the 4-yard gain with his legs. And he kind of defaulted to that a lot in that game. And obviously, without Drew Bobo, their ground game changed. Now they're going to be shuffling. If they're shuffling pieces on that offensive line, you've got maybe a week to prepare for that. That could be different as opposed to trying to do that in game. So I'm not going to say that we definitively know what that's going to look like. But I think they were trying to be conservative. That was a survive and advance type game. And I do think that they have shown us throughout this year that they're not always like that. And maybe Georgia Tech unlocked the code. I don't think there's enough of a sample size to say definitively that Gunnar Stockton is going in the wrong direction, because the last meaningful game before that, I mean, he was awesome against Texas. He's been incredible in their biggest games of the year. He was really good in the second half of this game against Bama. So I don't necessarily know that would be the case, but we'll play the results. If Georgia all of a sudden is just getting waxed and it's 28-7, we're like, what's wrong with Georgia? That's maybe not a good sign. But Georgia can also spin it as, if they lose this game, as long as Bama's not the matchup that we're going to see, we feel pretty good about our chances. That's kind of the upside of even if Georgia walks out of Atlanta with yet another loss to Alabama.
Yeah, and it can be a little bit, confusing too, because like I would say this about the Texas game. It was a little bit of like, let's say an ice cream sandwich game. First two drives, they looked awesome.
Are we talking regular standard ice cream sandwich, or are we talking Chipwich? Because those are two very different things.
Okay, let's go Chipwich because the outsides are better. There you go.
I love a Chipwich.
Okay,
so
great.
much,
There
bro.
you go. The outsides are better at a Chipwich. So first two drives against Texas, oh my gosh. I mean, this guy is like, and this is Stetson Bennett the fifth. But then we have kind of that hollow middle there. We have a couple of quarters where the offense is not really moving the ball. There are some weird reads. There are some weird turnovers. Then you come back at the end of the game in crunch time, and Gunnar Stockton's awesome. And so in the aggregate, the game log and the statistics look awesome. But against a team like Alabama that is not struggling offensively the way that Texas is, you really can't have that. And so I would say that conservative approach is exactly what Kane Womack would want, right? He would want you to take the 4 yards. And that's why I laughed so much last year at quote unquote, like the swarm defense, because a swarm defense doesn't work if there's poor communication. The swarm defense doesn't work if there's insubordination. Your safety's yelling at your coach where they should be swarming. This year, they do have a swarm defense where, hey, we'll let you have that 3 yards. We'll let you have that 4 yards. You got to go in on third down now, And so I think that we need to get into what Georgia excels at, which is when they trust their run game. And dude, Gunnar Stockton play action and those bootlegs is like a thing of beauty, man. When they can get the defense to suck in those linebackers linebackers and respect the run and start to pressure interior, and Gunnar Stockton just gets moving. He has this smoothness to his game where it's just like, okay, easy, And I think when they try to turn him into something that he's not, where it's like, hey, basically either kind of go out there, win the game, or we start getting into the Bobo special of the swing passes and moving sideline to sideline. I don't think it's going to work against Alabama. I think that specific thing, we joked about Cass Jones, but it's a reality with this offense. And that's kind of the one thing that Bobo has kept consistent, is that he will kind of attack those hash marks of the defense. I don't think that's something that you could do against Alabama. I think it's going to be more about the interior pushing, like genuinely saying we're going to commit to running the ball and then capitalize off those opportunities and taking the shots downfield if you're Stockton and you're in phase and you're on time, versus getting into kind of a third and long because you had a couple guys get tackled behind line of scrimmage and whatever. And so, yeah, I think that they need to, again, just kind of let them play their own game and not get cute.
Biggest takeaway from that, I'm going to Publix and getting a box of Chipwiches tonight.
Oh, yes.
So good, man. So good. Never has a Chipwich ever missed?
We need a cookie cake at a Gunnar Stockton. We need all cookie. We need no ice cream filling. We need no nonsense. No, barely even any icing. Let's just get right to the exterior of the Chipwich. I think that's the game plan for Georgia today.
I do love a cookie cake. Just get one of those prepared ones. Like, oh, is it somebody's birthday? Nope. Just wanted a cookie cake. Just sitting right there. Look good.
It's a great day to be alive is what it is, brother.
Yeah. Shout out Travis Tritt.